Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CEDH. I'm one of your hosts, Lyndon, aka Noobzors, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Matt, aka Null.
Yo.
And Morgan, aka Spleenface.
How's it going?
Unfortunately, Reed, aka Sick Robot, couldn't be with us here today. Hopefully we'll see him next week. In this episode, we're going to be talking about engines and cars, and all that kind of, we're
motorcycles,
we're
definitely trains, planes. Oh yeah,
but no paradox engines, unfortunately.
Dude, too soon.
Sorry, yeah, that was maybe a bit abrupt.
The real question is, was paradox engine an engine?
No, God.
We'll get into that later.
Hot take,
or maybe we won't.
Yeah, but so before we get into discussing engines, which it's going to be, it's kind of an interesting topic to get into, because it's a word that gets used between so many different card games, like Hearthstone, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon. I'm sure everyone borrows each other's language, and things get muddled up in the mix. So we'll be talking about engines in the context of Magic, specifically CEDH. So hopefully that we don't make anyone too upset by defining things incorrectly or how we can perceive things. But yeah.
But how many garnets does the deck have? That's the real question.
Very topical, not really. Yu-Gi-Oh reference, Morgan. Thank you. So before we get into that, what have you guys been up to since the last episode?
Honestly,
playing
not
some
a whole
Nexus
lot.
Super League, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, we played in the Nexus Super League. It's
participated. Yeah.
Yeah, we got played in the Nexus Super League.
We've contributed to win rates.
So what's your record? Just
shut up.
to have a record of the record.
So while you guys were doing that, and bringing shame to the podcast, I was grinding Arena for Kaldheim release at the new season, and I hit my peak Arena rating, which is rank 4 Mythic. So
wow,
pretty proud of that.
I actually don't know what that means.
It means that so Mythic, the way it works is that you start bronze, silver, gold,
it
platinum.
Means his PP is bigger than yours.
Platinum, diamond, mythic, and then normally when you get into mythic, it gives you a percentage. So like in 95% mythic is usually where people come in, and then after you cross the 100, so if you win, you'll go up to 96, 97, and then once you cross the threshold, then you get to numbered mythic. So you'd start, like, it just tells you your rank on, it's just like a leaderboard.
Oh, straight up,
so,
like actual 1500, the top leaderboard.
Yeah, 1500 is the last numbered position, all the way up to rank 1 mythic, and my peak position was number 4. So
dude, that's actually incredibly impressive.
I was pretty happy with it, but basically I got it because I was a sweaty nerd and just jammed games on the first day of the season. So when I got into Mythic, I got placed into rank 4 because only 4 people were in Mythic.
So basically what you're saying is,
thank you for telling me that bit.
all of our tournament results are being accomplished without the help of
the greatest Magic player on the podcast
playing Arena.
Yeah. And because I always wake up at the right time, so when I do my chess.com puzzle survival, I'll be the first one to complete it and always be rank 1.
Yeah, I think my last rating, once people are now in percentage mythic, so my current ranking I think is like 50, rank 50 mythic, so still really solid, but definitely not number 4. Next time the season rotates, I'm just gonna have to scumbag it even harder, because I was playing some meme decks with some friends, and I could have gotten rank 1 mythic if I had been tryharding it even more, so I'm gonna try that next time.
You're saying that since launch, literally 10 times as many people have proved that they're better at Magic than you? Man, that's...
Oh, God. So without slide past that.
We can sit around and shuffle words around all day.
Without further ado, let's jump into housekeeping. And so as always, we shout out new patrons in housekeeping, and we have a new patron this week, and big shout out to RJJ.
Just we normally do first like name last initial, but this one's a little awkward.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah. Thank you, RJ, for becoming a patron, and as always, you rock.
You, Roche.
Cool. So, new developments. Morgan, I know you have some things you want to talk about here.
Yeah, so last weekend, at the time we're recording this, there were, around a week ago, there were not one but two tournaments in the same day. So there was the Crack Open a Kaldheim tournament put on by the r/CDH Discord server, and it was everyone had to play at least one of your commanders had to be from either Legends or Kaldheim. And I believe that it was won by Kodama Sakashima, which is definitely an interesting deck. And it had commentary from Callahan and Rebel, and I'm definitely forgetting someone, and I'm sorry to whoever I'm forgetting. But yeah, it was definitely a cool tournament.
So just you said the winner played Kodama Sakashima, but you didn't say who the winner was. Was it?
Sorry, yeah. The winner was Hiss.
Yeah.
Sorry, do you...
Nope, go ahead.
And then, much earlier that day, there was also the Tier 1 Con tournament. So, Tier 1 Con is a Danish convention, and they're hosting several online tournaments that, like, leading into the actual convention, which will happen, when there's not a plague.
And Morgan just happened to be up,
Yeah, I just happened to be up at 3:30 a.m. to, banish to the basement so I didn't wake anyone up to play in this tournament. And I wound up taking it down with Razakats and going undefeated in pools and then winning in the final round.
So just to throw back for a minute to our year in review episode. What did most of us agree on was like the best deck? Was it Razakats? Because I'm pretty sure it was.
We definitely mentioned Razakats. I don't know that we said it. Said it was the best deck, but it was one we brought up.
I'm pretty sure we had several people saying that Razakats was the best best deck into the current meta, and it just.
I said it.
I'm pretty sure I also said it. And I thought Matt was on. He said like the stacks strategy with rule of laws, basically Razakats or something like that. But yeah, we were all very high on Razakats, and then Morgan puts up the results to prove it. So come to Into the North for your top tier advice. Okay. That's awesome. Also, congratulations, Morgan.
Thank you. Yeah, they're going to have more tournaments. I'll put the links for those in the description. And I believe they're also going to try and start them later, like not at 10 Central European time, so that, it's not like the worst for people in North America. So hopefully, maybe the next one will start at like 7 a.m. our time, which is like, early, but not 3 a.m. Why did I do this to myself early?
Dope.
So we'll put links if you're interested in participating. It's free to enter, and they had some pretty sweet prizes. So definitely check that out.
Awesome. Okay, and time to get into the main discussion topic of this episode, which is of course engines. So best place to start off. What is an engine? And we had a long pre-show.
And that's saying something. Our pre-shows are usually pretty long.
Can we only imagine how much longer it would have been had Reed been here?
No, it would have been shorter because he would have been the one to stop it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So why don't Morgan, you can take us through the this beginning stage of the definition, because we've got a nice multi-part definition for you guys. So strap in.
All right. So engines are cards or sets of cards that provide advantage. Sometimes, like, part of it is immediate, but some of that advantage comes along over time, along one of several axes in the game. the most common examples of these are cards and mana, but they can also provide things like card selection or or access to cards, like with sort of repeated tutor effects that don't provide direct card or mana advantage.
Yeah. So we phrased it as non-immediate, fully realized advantage along an axis. So yeah, the idea being that there are cards that, for instance, Orin Frostfang, not really a CEDH card, but it comes down and it provides quote unquote immediate advantage by, you can attack. I mean, Timna. Why don't I just say Timna?
Yeah, why didn't you just say Timna? Is there something we need to talk about here?
So Timna comes down, you attack with creatures, it provides immediate advantage, but it's not immediate fully realized advantage because it's persistent. So if there was a card that said, I guess a common casual example is like Phyrexian Arena versus, Read the Bones, or, some other, what's it, Painful Truths, the one with the draws for each color. But yeah, so like Painful Truths is card advantage that's fully realized immediately, and Phyrexian Arena not fully realized immediately. So if Phyrexian Arena ends up drawing the same amount of cards as Painful Truths, it doesn't matter. One's an engine card, one isn't, based on our definition. Okay.
Yeah. So then we further sort of divided these into two categories. So the first is standalone, and these are cards that don't really require any deck building considerations. So Phyrexian Arena, like Lyndon said earlier, is a good one. Right. No matter what your deck does, if you put Phyrexian Arena in play, it's going to draw you one card a turn, and it doesn't have any particularly obvious synergies with strategies or other cards that you might be running, other than things that specifically mention interacting with you drawing cards, like draw doublers. But generally you don't need cards to make Phyrexian Arena do the Phyrexian Arena thing. Matt, do you want to talk about the other category?
Sure. And our other category is synergy based, and we further broke that down into two categories. So start off strategy based. So our first example here is Planeswalkers. So I thought we had an example here, but essentially,
I think the example that we had was Jace, the Mind Sculptor.
Yeah, Jace or Teferi in 60 cards.
In 60 card formats, or Teferi, Hero of Dominaria.
Yeah, so the idea being that they're much like Phyrexian Arenas, where they kind of provide standalone card advantage, but they require additional strategy elements to be going on in the deck in order to be fully realized. Like Phyrexian Arena no one can attack a Phyrexian Arena to death. Whereas your Teferi, if you slam a Teferi, draw a card, and then they just attack it and it dies, you're not a happy camper. So the strategy element there is like control, removal, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and our second subcategory here is package based, and our example here is Skull Clamp. So, providing that level of 1 toughness creatures.
Mm-hmm. And I think package based, synergy based, package based engine cards are what people typically associate with engine cards. And I think
they're usually kind of the most interesting in Commander, because a lot of the package-based engines are packaged with commanders.
Mm-hmm. And this is I was talking about engines being used in other card games. I think this is typically what other card games use to describe engines. Things with lots of internal card-based synergy. So we can discuss some examples, because we've broken down some common engines in CDH. So as a Gitrog player, I'm obviously going to use Gitrog as my example. So a great example of is Gitrog plus Life from the Loam, where they each say lands on them, and they both say graveyard. They're both doing similar things with lands in the graveyard, and they mesh nicely. And each they're typically with package-based engines, the cards that are included all become greater than the sum of their parts.
Yeah, they certainly provide each other benefits, in kind of that exponential sense.
Mm-hmm. So let's break down some of the. We've got two categories here. We've got engines in the 99 and engines in the command zone. So first, we're going to cover engines in the command zone, obviously with a focus on CDH. So we kind of went through the CDH metagame report, as well as racking the top of our heads to pick what we think are the most like quintessential engine-based commanders in CDH. And obviously we're going to be missing some, so please don't rage.
No.
But my favorite commander isn't on the list.
that means we don't think it's a CDH deck, and you should play a different deck. That's exactly what that means.
I think we should be taking Tavesh off the list then, right?
Oh boy!
So the first one on the list is Godo.
Yeah. Oh god. Yeah. So we'll run down. So let's Morgan, you start. This is your baby.
Yeah.
This is okay. The first one is Kess. Now, obviously, she requires. She sort of straddles the line between whether or not how much synergy she really requires. Like, playing instants and sorceries is not exactly like a particularly strong deck building consideration. But obviously there are cards that she plays super nice with. Like Intuition is the biggest one, and that's historically been in every Kess deck because it's bonkers. But there is added synergy with things like wheels, or just ways of your cards winding up in the graveyard. And also just having, the ability to double up on tutors means that, making a lot of mana is potentially really good. So, yeah, just buying back instants and sorceries is virtual card advantage that very quickly turns into real card advantage, like cards in hand card advantage.
One thing, actually, I just was kind of thinking about this in our definition for engine that we should kind of make clear is that you can kind of we brought up that there's its advantage along an axis in terms of cards, mana, access to cards in your deck, like a toolbox. But people typically use the word engine in a lot of contexts. They'll say card advantage engine, mana engine, threat engine, and sometimes combo engine. And for this discussion, we're avoiding combo packages in our discussion of engines. So this is just primarily focused on the non-combo aspects of engines. So yeah, that's why we're not going to mention things like consult in Kess or come get Rob Dakmore or whatever.
Yeah, which I guess I should specify with Intuition that obviously in many builds it does function as a combo engine, but it is like where you get like Unearth, Thassa's Oracle, and Demonic Consultation or whatever. But often you can use it as like you tutor for the interaction to stop someone, and then also bin cards that you plan to cast with Kess later, or like set up some line like that, and also just casting it twice is very, very silly. You can also bin something like a Yawgmoth's Will, like get LED Yawgmoth's Will and something else, and then just play your entire graveyard type deal. So it has a lot of uses in Kess beyond being. Uses Inkess as an engine beyond being a combo piece.
Mm-hmm. Next up, we've got my favorite deck, Get Rog Monster. The kind of, I think, arguably one of the most obvious synergy-based package-based engines in CDH.
I mean, you have Cabal Therapy naming Mana Drain in the command zone. It's crazy.
What?
Oh god,
I don't even want to know.
But yeah, so Life from the Loam and Ramanap Excavator I think are the biggest, most obvious engine pieces. We're going to discuss later on engines that don't involve the synergy with the commander, or like that are more separate in the 99, because Loam and Ramanap obviously in the 99, but they have direct synergy with the commander and are really, at least these two cards are really only run because of that synergy with the commander. Whereas there's other engine pieces in the deck that are run basically on a standalone basis, and we'll be discussing that in the next section. But yeah, moving on.
Wait, are you saying that Gearrug Monster runs Sylvan Library?
Gasp. Maybe.
What a crazy take.
Maybe.
So these next two I'm gonna kind of consider similar for the sake of our list. So this is Kenrith and Thrasios, because under Kenrith we have the same things as Thrasios, which is big dorks or really big sources of mana. So you can also consider Cradle in this regard, but also cost reduction type pieces. So Training Grounds, Zerda, Biomancer's Familiar. And then lastly, the biggest one, which is Seaborn Muse. And that's because of once you can put enough mana into activating Thrasios and Kenrith, but also maintain, your counter spells, then that's an unstoppable engine in its own. But with Kenrith, our last one also is Phantasmal Image. If anyone else wants to put up one on for that.
So like this card has a lot of uses. Obviously, people would use it to assemble. If you can make 8 treasures off a dockside, I can't believe I'm saying that. Like it's not crazy. If you can make 8 treasures off a dockside, you can actually just combo by using Kenrith to try and put a counter on it. It dies to the Phantasmal Image trigger. You bring it back. But you can also just turn it into like random useful things and then like reset it whenever it stops being useful. Like you just play it, you copy you play it, you copy someone's dockside, great, and then you like it makes 6 treasures and then you kill it off, and then next turn you just bring it back and like copy Kess. And then there's just a whole bunch of like really sort of silly things you can do with that card, because Kenrith basically has the ability to both kill it and put it back into play and let it copy something new each time.
Right on. So our next piece is, we mentioned Thrasios, and next up we got Tymna. And arguably these two are the most, quintessential engine commanders. So I said Gitrog for, maybe the most quintessential package-based engine commander, but Thrasios and Tymna, just two of the most powerful engines in the command zone, each doing different things, but just, overwhelming the opponent in advantage. So with Tymna, we've got listed Loyal Apprentice, which is something that's only really sees play in like the, obviously the red-based Tymna deck. So something like a Tymna Tana is usually a place where you'll see a Loyal Apprentice. But Loyal Apprentice, just play your commander, poop out, Flying Thopters, pretty good with Tymna. Some other things that some other synergy pieces with Tymna that maybe even Mind Sensor, I think, is one where with Opposition Agent now, even Mind Sensor is sometimes falling to the wayside. But just the fact that it flies and has that synergy with Tymna, like including flyers and flying packages or evasive packages in your Tymna decks, to really emphasize the Tymna card advantage engine is pretty good idea.
Yeah, Tymna definitely synergizes with cards that are useful and happen to be evasive.
Yeah,
which is for some reason a thing.
Yeah, they just really love like stapling random keywords onto their hate bears.
Keywords don't just directly compare, right? They're completely different versions of evasion. It's not just the most keywords wins.
Okay. Next up, we've got I think perhaps the most standalone engine of the commanders we've listed so far.
Wait, are you saying you don't? This is Crom, and are you saying you don't play a bunch of cards that give your opponents more cards and more mana so they feed your Crom?
Oh my goodness!
Come on, what are you doing?
Yeah, I'm playing freaking Magus of the Vineyard and all the Eladamar's Vineyard.
No. Yeah. It all makes sense now. That's why Ludovic is so bad. Because it draws cards for your opponents, but then they use those cards and feed your Crom.
Nice. Yeah. Matt, you got this one?
Sure. Next up we have Tevesh. Yes, this is a CDH commander. And I guess it synergizes with, or I guess it's an engine in the sense that it draws cards at, under most conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that like it's kind of a threat engine, obviously somewhat commander dependent, but like once it starts getting up to 9 or 10 loyalty, your opponents often feel forced to make like attacks that are somewhere between like bad and sus to just like stop it from ulting and just generating like that insane amount of burst value.
Yeah, exactly. They're sacrificing draws or treasures or, you know, what have you in order to deal with it.
So it's definitely a bad feeling to have Tymna in play and be like, I guess I have to attack Tavesh.
Yeah. I'm gonna actually pass this one off to Morgan because I think you have the most experience with this deck. So Inala, which is one I would typically not call an engine commander in CEDH, in casual EDH for sure when you're just trying to get value off your wizards. But I want to hear, Morgan, your justification for Inala on this list.
I mean, I think that like many people build Inala decks in a way that they don't really generate much. Like, she's not really an engine. Sometimes they'll include like a couple cards just that synergize with her very well. So like for a long time, you know, like Snapcaster Mage is a card that just like doubling up on things like that is very, very strong. And then while Archaeomancer and or Scholar of the Ages is like typically a combo piece, it's often something like doubling up on it can get you out of like sort of the bad situations that you find yourself in if you're like being interacted with a lot or stopped. So like I think that there's some amount of value engine that's probably the correct amount to include in Inala. It's not a lot, and I probably include more than is like optimal, but and I have some like pet cards in Inala, but I think that like, you know, a card like Snapcaster Mage is definitely, you know, very strong with Inala.
I definitely count it as a value engine if your combo cards are able to pull double duty as like value engine cards, and that's just kind of where you want to be when playing CDH generally.
And like, yeah, usually you try and win when you cast Spellseeker, but like for example, I've you know, sometimes I've been playing and it's like, well, there's a Grafdigger's Cage or like Drannith Magistrate or whatever in play, so like, and I don't have the mana to like properly set up, you know, bounce that and then continue my Spellseeker combo. So then you just tutor for value pieces. I also I don't think most people are on it, but I have just Dual Caster Mage has been just absolute nonsense with Inala.
I like that.
Yeah, that sounds sweet.
I mean, it just straight up combos with some of the flicker cards, but also just like double copying people's spells just gets very silly very quickly. Like, you know, someone casts like a Finale of Devastation, and you're like, well, yeah, let's go grab Dockside, and then we'll go grab Spellseeker, and so yeah, it's very easy to like. Obviously, you need to put in wizards that generate value for Inala to be a value engine, but she definitely is when you do.
Okay, next up. This is kind of another Morgan deck.
I mean, this is kind of is another Morgan deck, but I can start it off, I'm sure. So next we got Hullen, and our example card here is White Mane Lion, which I put down. Maybe that's not the exact card, but
I think that is probably the best card to list as a value engine, because like Shrieking Drake is obviously better than White Mane Lion, but Shrieking Drake is a card where like most of the time you're using it to combo, whereas White Mane Lion is actually just like 2 mana growth spiral with buyback 0.
Yeah.
Like so that's like White Mane Lion is the card that you most just play it to generate value over time, and there have been plenty of situations where it's like, okay, I don't think I can try and combo for one reason or another. You know, I think there's too much interaction. I don't want to expose the Shrieking Drake, because if Shrieking Drake gets killed, that like turns off a lot of my combos. So it's like, well, I'll just tutor for White Mane Lion, and then, you know, 2 turn cycles from now, when I drew like, you know, 6 or 7 cards extra over my opponents, you know, then I'll go for like a more protected win, and also put a bunch of lands into play, so I have the mana to back up my win. I'll go for something protected. But obviously, you know, Hullen draws cards when you cast creatures, so that's pretty quintessentially a value engine, unless it's being a combo engine because you're actually just winning the game off of it.
And drawing more cards finds you more creatures, which either produce you more mana or draw you more cards.
Yes.
That's the nature of the engine.
It definitely has some feedback.
This next one I think is also like pretty similar in the same regard to Holland and White Mane Line, which is Elsha and Top, because with Elsha you can play cards off the top of your library, and then Top fixes the top cards of your library, but also is playable off the top and draws cards. And then just like Fimage and Kenrith, it also has a combo, though a much more realistic combo, I think.
You might be surprised.
I am not, especially if there's an Elsha player at the table. But yeah.
And then we've got Kaikar, obviously playing spells, making mana.
Yeah.
If you can...
I didn't want to say Top twice, but
yeah. And then if you're able to
honestly, I think the better synergy with Kikar is like the Future Sight type effects. Like those are the ones that actually play nice with generating the free mana. Like Top obviously synergizes when you get another piece, but like Top and Kikar alone is like pretty. It is not like, it doesn't generate much value beyond just like, yeah, I guess you get a mana back.
Skull Clamp though, if you're
Skull Clamp definitely generates value with Kikar.
yeah.
There's lots of cards that generate value with Kikar.
And finally on the list, we've got Amanatu, basically just a repeatable flicker effect. So things like Gilded Drake, and of course you're running other cards in Amanatu like Wishclaw Talisman to really take advantage of the flicker and her unique flicker ability of being able to flicker cards you own and then getting them back, which is pretty dope.
Yeah, huge with Gilded Drake. Wishclaw Talisman's a bit different, I think, because it just results in a win, but with Gilded Drake, it's quite degenerate.
Gilded Drake is quite degenerate, yes. So that concludes our discussion of the engines in the command zone for CDH. And now we're going to kind of get into the engines in the 99. So, as we mentioned before, we have this broken down into two categories, one of which is subdivided further. So we've got the standalone, that was, Phyrexian Arena. Then we've got synergy based, which is strategy based, like the Planeswalkers, where it requires a particular strategy for the effect to be realized, or the engine to be realized, and then package based, where it's focused on kind of like the internal card synergy. So we've broken it down. So first up, we've got the standalone cards in CDH that are engines, and we kind of the cards that don't really require deck building considerations. So we've kind of got a pretty big power, pretty nice selection of cards here, and we've got Necropotence, Sylvan Library, and Rhystic Study listed as examples. And obviously, this is not a complete list, but these are some pretty good ones
definitely
to talk
the
about.
standouts. Yeah,
I think Carpet of Flowers and would certainly be on there.
Yep.
We discussed Mystic Remora. It's obviously a little bit of a gray area because it has an expiration date on it often, so then it's
yeah, but I think
in terms of the immediacy, if it doesn't continue to generate value, but
I think it kind of performs in the opposite way that Rhystic Study does, and strictly in regards to the engine, because it survives longer, or it's more effective in the end game, where Rhystic Study is less effective in the end game. But anyway,
so let's kind of rekindle a bit of our discussion that we were having pre-show that was a bit contentious on what really makes these cards fit into this category, because our kind of agreed upon idea was that these cards are obviously providing value over time, with the exception of Necropotence being in a bit of a gray area on that, because you can sort of fully realize the value of Necropotence and you are limited by your life total. So what really was interesting about these cards is that, at least with the exception of Rhystic Study, Sylvan Library, Necropotence are cards that have a base value engine kind of mode where they're just good enough and they're running decks like Gitrog or whatever. But then to really kind of accentuate them a bit further, There are decks that are run like I guess there's been a trend of people running Ikra recently. So if you're providing some sort of big life gain, Necro Potence can be more fall into the traditional like long-term value engine, and then Sylvan Library is able to provide you that same consistent card advantage further into the game, and you're able to just like take 8 every turn, which, as you know, anyone who's played with Sylvan Library and CDH knows, like that's definitely not always going to be you're not going to be able to be taking 8 every turn for the entire game if things are going long.
If I take 8 every turn, that's still a maximum of like 24 damage, right? Because the game just ends.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I mean, if you do have a bruise in the command zone, you are gonna keep paying 8.
But yeah, so there is a bit of gray area on some of these cards where they can become more strategy or synergy based, depending on including other things. But at least the base mode of these cards is just a generic standalone value engine.
And I think it's also probably important to note that with Necropotence, many times Necropotence's value is immediately fully realized.
Yeah.
With like Final Fortune.
or even just passing the turn, but like you play Necro, you draw 30, you sculpt a disgusting hand, and then you try and win on the next turn. As opposed to you play Necro, you draw up to 12, you discard down to 7, and then next turn you draw another 5 cards, etc.
Yeah, it's not like 20 life formats where you actually do need to kind of spread it out and be smart about it.
So next up, we've got engines that require deck building considerations. So the previous one does not, and this one does. And this is again our strategy synergy category. So here we have listed Tendershoot Dryad, Oakham Adversary, and Dark Confidant. So why don't you guys talk about Adversary and Confidant first, and I'll tackle Tendershoot.
Yeah, so I think that both of these cards are just like they're certainly a lot slower than things like Sylvan Library and Rhystic Study. So they, if you're playing like a very fast deck, particularly one that doesn't have a lot of like creature-based synergies, if you're not playing like Neoforms and things like that, playing Oakham Adversary is like pretty underwhelming. You're probably casting it on turn 2. If your meta's fast, there might not, like if your meta's very fast, there might not be that consistency on someone having like a dork or a carpet. So maybe you can't even cast it on turn 2, and then if you play it and your game is probably looking to end on turn 4 or 5, like 1 in a green, draw 2 cards is pretty underwhelming as a Magic card. And that's what happens if you play Oakham on turn 2 and then the game ends after your turn 4, which could be one of your opponent's turn 5s. So you definitely want to be on a strategy where you're playing a decent amount of interaction, or possibly some like sort of disruptive pieces, either like full on stacks or more like hate bears that are either asymmetrical or like semi asymmetrical.
Or you're trying to take advantage of the body,
or you're trying to take advantage of the body.
Timna has that synergy.
Yeah, if you're playing Timna, then you're drawing 2 cards every turn from it. So that sort of thing is decks where you'd want to be seeing Oakham Adversary, and like very all-in fast decks definitely wouldn't want to be on it.
Which is kind of the opposite of this next card, Dark Confidant, where you want to be sustaining the Dark Confidant value, but also not endanger your primary, or one of your game plans, which is Ad Nauseam. So you are leaning towards that like low CMC.
Yeah, I think the thing with these, like, they're basically Phyrexian arenas, right? Like they're just 2 CMC Phyrexian arenas.
With a couple extra steps.
Yeah, a couple extra steps. These effects, I think on the command zone, that they'd always talk about how they'd evaluate Phyrexian Arena versus Read the Bones, like I mentioned earlier. It is tough to like look at Dark Confidant and be like, should I be running just like Night's Whisper or Signed in Blood instead? And then when you start thinking about that, you're like, oh god, am I really considering running those cards? And what it kind of boils down to is that Dark Confidant is kind of like a hedge in some decks. Like if you're playing a Storm deck that's more or less all in and you don't have value in the command zone, sometimes it's nice to put in something like a Dark Confidant to allow you to have at least some game plan for when the game goes long. And obviously there's some additional synergy provided by the 2/1 body in the form of like Culling the Weak and Diabolic Intent and whatnot, more so than the Night's Whisper and Friends.
It certainly depends on what you plan to, or what you expect to go up against. Like I think we cut Dark Confidant from Cheese Rush, right? Just based on the current metagame.
That sounds right.
Yeah, the scalability of Dark Confidant is and Oakham is not that high, which a lot of the value engines we were discussing previously, they do scale pretty well. So next on this list is Tendershoot Dryad, which is kind of this was the big debate that we were having pre-show, and which category to place it in. And really, what it kind of boils down to is that Tendershoot has, as a standalone card, you're going to play it like in a complete vacuum. You can play this card, and it's going to end the game, in a few turns, just through the amount of onboard pressure that it's just pooping out. And there's no real requirements to make that happen. Now, the reason why it falls into this category is that it has a kind of a glaring weakness, which is it does take multiple turns to close out the game, and it is 5 mana. So you do have to, usually tap out for a turn in order to play it. Unlike something like a Seedborn Muse where you play it and it's basically free. So Tendershoot Dryad usually dovetails really nice with Stacks decks, because that's really the only time where you see Tendershoot Dryad is in Stacks. And that's because Stacks has it's effective at taking the game and controlling the game from the short to medium term. So you're let's say you play a Rule of Law, your opponents have to find removal, and then there's sometimes a metagame around when is the appropriate time to remove the Rule of Law so that I'm able to win but my opponents aren't able to win. I'm not king making, so it's able to stabilize things in that term. But people run value engines in CDH, so oftentimes you slam a Rule of Law, you will need to close the game, because in the long term you're giving your opponents time to find answers, counterspell backup, and their combos, right? So you need to have some way to close the game in the medium term, and that's kind of where Tendershoot comes in. So you help stabilize the game and not lose the turn you played Tendershoot, and allow yourself to survive those few turns it takes for Tendershoot to close things out, and doesn't take you to the long game. And then they're covering each other's weaknesses, which is why they see play together.
So, to be clear, I didn't say my position wasn't that Tendershoot Dryad doesn't require some sort of like strategy-based synergy. At the time, we hadn't sort of separated the difference between card synergy and strategy synergy, and so my argument was that like you don't need like specific cards to enable Tendershoot. You just need a deck that, one way or another, is going to not lose the game in the short to medium term.
Yeah.
And so the middle ground on that is we went, well, okay, that's a strategy synergy, because it doesn't matter how you're accomplishing it, versus a card synergy where if Tendershoot Dryad had like a clause where your opponents could just like tap 6 artifacts and kill it or whatever, then it would be like, okay, well then you need Null Rod or whatever, like something like that.
Yeah, well, one thing you can notice is that if you look at the cards in the category of just standalone and compare them to the strategy synergy cards, is they're really kind of the same. The only thing that's differentiating them is mana cost, where it's like a card is standalone if it's I guess efficient or like more or less good enough to play, right? Like,
yeah, if it's efficient enough that you don't need a deck that one way or another is creating favorable conditions for it.
Yeah. Okay, and then I think the most interesting standalone engines, or not standalone, sorry, the most interesting engines that aren't either standalone or strategy based are the card synergy based engines that are going to be found in the 99 of the deck, not with the command zone. So here we have Neoform, Eldritch Evolution, Natural Order, which is kind of weird that we would talk about, because you're supposed to realize the value over time, so we'll get into that. Birthing Pod, which is kind of in line with those, but it's its own separate thing. And then Yisan, you're noticing a bit of a trend here. Seedborn Muse and Smothering Tithe. So, Matt, why don't you cover the the Neo Evo Natural Order as someone who's played messed around with some of those cards?
Yeah, sure. So the deck is designed to have live hits on all of your CMCs based on the CMCs of your commander. So you're going to have your 3 slot because you're on Thrasios. In some builds you're on Bruise Tile, so you'll have your 5 slot like Seaborn Muse. But also you kind of go up the chain because each of your targets help you hit your next tutor. So like your next Neoform or your next Evolution or your next Natural Order.
Yeah. A lot of the thing with Neoform is that a lot of the decks don't necessarily require that much deck building consideration, because a lot of the good cards that you want to hit are kind of just already there, and they form like a natural curve, and they're cards that you'd be running anyway. So like you've got Hullbreacher, Opposition Agent at 3. You've got if you're gonna Neoform a Dork, you've got Gilded Drake, Thassa's Oracle.
I think it kind of just stops at Thassa's Oracle, right? Because like you can go from one CMC to win very quickly with Neoform.
Well, sure, but like I'm definitely not above Neoforming a Dork into a Drannith, right?
Yeah,
like
definitely, for sure. Totally agreed.
And so there's it's a bit gets a bit muddled there, but when you have to put a bit more consideration into your curve and what you're running to make sure you're hitting, so like if you're running Neoform, and like let's say you're playing a Thrasios Tymna deck that's a bit slower, so maybe it's like a Razaketh deck, or maybe it's like some kind of like hybrid CST list that's a bit slower. Like you can consider putting things in at 4 to Neoform your Tymna into, like obviously there's Notion Thief, but I've seen people run Linvala to some reasonable amount of success, and you're kind of able to run those cards, and you're kind of considering those cards in the context of the CMCs of Neoform. And Natural Order was also on this list. Typically in the Thrasios decks, Natural Order is just a Seedborn Muse, an additional copy of Seedborn Muse. But I've messed around with Natural Order outside of Thrasios. I was messing around with it in my Tana Tymna deck, and it kind of fits as a engine piece, as an additional copy of something like a Tindershoot Dryad. Like you can't run, like Natural Order is generally not good enough to run on your own unless you're like doing Hulk or something like that. So you really need to have like a mini package of things to put with your Natural Order in order for it to really be like a Natural Order engine. But yeah, that one is still a bit dicey without the Seedborn Muse Thrasios kind of thing going on. Not completely sold on it yet in the decks I've been testing it in. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Surprise Archon is definitely spooky.
Yeah, I've been Archon is kind of my go-to target over not going for Tindershoot that much, but yeah, getting an Archon down on instance, pretty hype. Yeah. So next up we've got,
especially when you then bin a Razaketh for me.
Next up we've got Birthing Pod. So Morgan, you want to discuss why Pod isn't just a combo piece?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, most decks that are playing Pod are playing some sort of combo line with it. Usually, like the Veladar, Karmic, Kiki line, but this is also a card that like you can use to upgrade your dorks into hate pieces, or turn not so great hate pieces into better hate pieces, or use, like, you can pod things into Eternal Witness, or even things like Reclamation Sage, where essentially, or what's the new Sky something, the like Fiend Artisan, but better. I'm blanking on the name.
Fiend Artisan, but better.
Like the enters the battlefield to exile something with CMC.
Oh, Skyclave Apparition.
Oh, Skyclave.
But that's not really a
That's
Fiend
the one.
Artisan. I was confused.
I mean, okay, sure. It enters and it exiles something, and then when it leaves, they. Anyways,
Oh, what am I thinking? Okay, no, you're right. Fiend Artisan. I was thinking of what's that stupid card for the hybrid black green? That's what I thought you were thinking.
Fiend Artisan.
Yeah, feed Artisan.
Skyclave Apparition or like things like that, where essentially you have this toolbox package, and first of all, Pod it's letting you cheat on mana costs, right? Because like when you sacrifice a 3-drop, you put a 4-drop into play, and you usually paid 1 mana and 2 life to do that. And then also it's giving you access to your entire deck, so you're finding specifically the cards you need rather than sort of raw card advantage. And it lets you, in situations where you don't think you can go for a win, either, you drew a piece or you think people have interaction and will stop you. If you actually try and win, you can get all sorts of stuff. You can get Dranith, you can get Dockside, you can get, Eternal Witness or Skyclave Apparition, Opposition Agent. You could get Collector Roof, probably don't want to get Collector Roof. You get Archon of Emeria, you just have sort of a huge range of options that are potentially very useful.
I think one more thing to mention with Pod, another case, is finding something like Karmic Guide, where you can bring back bodies and that ultimately result in having access to more CMC. So Pod is an engine in that sense because it doesn't. You start with a particular CMC, but then you actually get a variety of CMCs down the line if you choose to make that decision. Though, maybe not CDH play, but certainly
Pod,
other formats.
Pod is a card that I think most people look at primarily as a combo piece, but I think it doesn't really make the cut as a combo piece alone. And you really need to consider it and change your deck to unlock the engine ability of Pod in order to really make it a CDH playable card, in my opinion.
Pod just makes me sad because it's a great combo piece in decks that desperately want to play Collector Roof Null Rod and Stone Sands.
Every time, man, every time.
Yeah. That's why I don't play Blood Pod and instead play Razaketh.
Wait, but
Raspberry Jam.
Yeah.
Are you sure you don't play Blood Pod?
Reed is
next card.
Reed's not here to defend himself, but Reed's the only one who is playing his Blood Moon and Birthing Pod in his not Blood Pod deck. I run none of those cards. People keep harassing me with this stupid Blood Pod
I
claim.
really do want to keep harassing you with this.
You and the entire Gitrog server, man. It's so annoying. Next up we've got Yasan, which in the command zone, it's an engine. It's a combo engine. It's a value engine. It's a toolbox. It just kind of does. Yeah.
I feel like in the command zone, it's a combo engine
Primarily, yeah.
that has you fit one piece of value or access into it along the way.
Yeah, it's kind of it's like Pod, like everything we just talked about with Pod. It's primarily it's a combo engine. You're not usually running Pod in these hate bears kind of decks for toolboxing because it's just not too efficient. And sacking your creatures isn't always great. But if it's a combo engine that can back up as a value engine or a toolbox, that's pretty nice. And that's Yasan in the command zone. But in the 99 is kind of interesting, and that's something that we haven't been seeing so much lately. I know, Morgan, I think you've done some Yasan in the 99 stuff, right?
Shh, don't tell anyone. Obviously it gives you access to cards that you need, be those hate bears or combo pieces, just as a tutor, finding one of your combo pieces. It's also very good at protecting stuff, so you can find, your Grand Abolishers or your Ranger Captains. It also, it theoretically has a built-in combo that I think most people don't run, where if you have white in the deck, you combo on verse 3 with Wire Witch Symbiote, Priest of Titania, and Mirror Entity.
Yeah.
Turns out
But,
Yisan with more than just green is pretty good.
Oh my god, green white Yisan, yes please. I just want to be able to get Restoration Angel. That's
what you want. That's what you want, man. I want all the stacks,
Dude.
man.
Yeah, because
That's the
because
best
then
part
you can
about pod is that you can reset it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're not like you don't like run through and then get to 4 and be like, well, I
And
guess
then
I
it's,
don't
Yisan
have.
is like just wet bread.
Dude, that's why Yisan
Yes.
runs. That's why Monogreen Yisan runs a Woodland Bellower, so that you can get back down to 3.
Yeah. But yeah, so obviously, many of these cards double as combo engines, and Yisan certainly falls in that category depending on the deck. But I mean, it's pretty much directly both card and access advantage. So as long as you don't directly win the game off cards it finds you, I suppose that makes it a value engine.
And then our final 2, kind of similar in many ways. We've got Seedborn Muse and Smothering Tithe. So we've already talked about Seedborn Muse and how it fits in with Thrasios and stuff. It is kind of a standalone mana engine, but that really isn't good enough to make the cut in CEDH. You really need something to unlock the card advantage engine aspect of Seedborn Muse, and it really comes alive as an engine when you're including it with things like Thrasios and you're building your deck with interaction and you want to be holding your mana up. That's really when it shines.
But I would even say that it doesn't just work well strictly with Thrasios. You do need to have those big mana type cards because Seedborn Muse does not protect itself, and it does need to survive long enough to result in a win.
Yeah.
And it is very fragile.
Yeah, and I think it's something that's often underestimated with Seedborn Muse. Like I've seen a bunch of people essentially say like, oh well, Seedborn Muse plus Thrasios is basically like at the start of your next turn draw 10 cards, or like things like that. Like they phrase it just in terms of like you're gonna activate Thrasios twice a turn and you're gonna draw a disgusting amount of cards. And like obviously that's hugely impactful, but I think that kind of undersells it because of the insane flexibility of being able to do other things with the mana, right? Like, yeah, sometimes you just activate Thrasios twice on everyone's turn, but like one of those turns you actually you activate a Thrasios only once, and then you cast 2 pieces of interaction, and then like one of those turns you hit a Vamp Tutor, so you cast that, you also cast a piece of interaction, and then you Thrasios the card you vamped into your hand or whatever. And like Seedborn Muse, like I think in a world where there was like a green red commander that just had like a mana sink ability on it, I think Seedborn Muse is a lot less good in that deck than it is in a Thrasios deck with like a bunch of counter spells and an instant speed interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And this might sound like kind of a silly point, but you do need to put real counter spells in your Seedborn deck. Like you can't just put Dispels and Swan Songs. Like you need like counter spell, mana drain,
delay.
Yeah. If I'm like being completely honest, definitely replaces slots of even like cards like Negate, because you do need to protect it.
Gilded Drake
it does just die to Gilded Drake. Yeah.
Who doesn't love Gilded Drake?
It's even worse than just removal when it's Gilded Drake. It's quite devastating.
Okay, one of you tell me why Smothering Tithe is on this list, but we don't see Notion Thief or Hull Breacher. I thought these were all the same kind of wheel cards. Someone explain why Smothering Tithe is an engine card unlike the others.
Because Smothering Tithe interacts with your opponent's draw steps.
Is that it? Is that really it?
Pretty much, because what that means is that if you play Smothering Tithe, like when you play Notion Thief, if you don't have anything that works with it, it does not generate any value. It's a hate bear essentially that says your opponents can't draw more than 1 card a turn, but it doesn't actually generate you anything, barring like a few corner case interactions like Crom triggers are mandatory. But with Smothering Tithe, when you play it, because your opponents are forced essentially to draw 1 card a turn, you like you will get treasures, unless they are paying endlessly for some reason. And the other thing is that because it doesn't prevent your opponents from drawing cards the way like a Hull Breacher or a Notion Thief does, your opponents still will actually draw cards, and then you will generate value from Smothering Tithe. Like if you tap out for Smothering Tithe and don't do anything else, you almost always untap with some treasures, and that's not at all true with something like Hull Breacher.
So I think that concludes the listing value engines portion of this episode. Because for the last bit, it was basically just listing value engines.
Yeah.
You won't believe number 7.
And now we're on to the more discussion aspect. So some discussion and questions that we're going to discuss and ask each other. But I want to kick things off with something that I just thought of that's not on this list, which is Sol Ring a value engine?
Oh my god. Okay.
Deep thought, man, on this one.
Are we at gut check yet? No.
Sorry?
I said, are we at gut check yet?
Yeah.
I think that's a dangerous path towards a single large category called magic cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sol Ring is not an engine.
Yeah, neither are
mana dorks.
neither are cards that become permanents that just tap for mana.
So what's the key distinction between because you said that even if you're not, so if you're making a treasure in each opponent's draw step from Smothering Tithe, it makes it a value engine, right? As opposed to something like Hull Breacher. So then why wouldn't something like a Thran Dynamo be a value engine? And that's what kind of led me to Sol Ring.
Because with Thran Dynamo, it doesn't accrue anything over time. It lets you cast spells themselves that have value, but if you have a Thran Dynamo in play for 10 turns and you never do anything with it, that's not you haven't accrued any value. Whereas if you never crack a treasure on Smothering Tithe, you eventually wind up with a giant stack of treasures that you can feed into something else that you presumably put in your deck at some point.
So then assuming something like Awakening Zone, right? The one that makes Eldrazi, God, there's 2 of them. There's Awakening Zone and then there's From Beyond. One of them makes Scions, one of them makes Spawns, yeah.
Oh, Spawns, yeah.
So
those are value engines, they're just
I was going to say, assuming you're not interacting with the bodies, like with a Skull Clamp or something, then those would meet the definition of a value engine because they're accruing the mana over time, even though on a turn-by-turn basis, Sol Ring would provide more mana.
Remember that time where I said we could just sit around and shuffle words around?
Yeah.
I feel like
I disagree.
Yeah, I think that fundamentally, a permanent that just taps for mana has a very immediate use it or lose it thing where you can't accrue value over time without casting spells that are the things that are actually generating value.
That being said, Sol Ring with Crewfix. Wow.
Yeah, that works.
That's an engine.
I mean, yeah, Crewfix is certainly a mana advantage engine. I would never deny that.
Yeah, so then it does bring up some interesting points about whether or not Seedborn Muse, because you're not technically, unless you have something to use it with, you're not able to convert that into something that accrues, or Carpet of Flowers.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. That actually, thinking about this definition, maybe, I mentioned Carpet of Flowers earlier, maybe I don't actually consider that a value engine just because it's essentially just a permanent that taps for mana at a restrictive time.
Nice. I'm glad we could
it does tap for more mana over time.
That is fair.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. Next
up, we have, are engines good? Which I feel like is a weird question. It's almost like a non-question because it depends on the engine, right? It feels like engines are basically, it's is just the body of a car a car? No, a car needs an engine in order to be a car, right? It needs to be able to go somewhere. So a deck, lots of decks really need, not all decks need engines. You look at like Mono Red Burn or something in 60 card. Doesn't have an engine. But
his Eidolon of the Great Revel and engine.
oh god. But dude, is a 2/2 attacker his Goblin Guided engine?
Oh my god.
It is. It's a card draw engine for your opponent. But so in 60 card, I think the requirement of an engine is less so, but EDH really is an engine-centered format, not just CEDH, but EDH as a whole. The core definition of what I think makes a deck mid-power or above is playing engines and maximizing synergies between the cards in your deck. What people usually call like non-engine based decks is like Battle Cruiser, right? That's kind of where you're just playing big, stompy threats, big, strong splashy cards, and that's not really engine or synergy based, but mid power and above, which is where I think most people fall in EDH, is generally around mid power. Very engine focused.
I actually don't think that's right, but
okay, well, let's not get too deep into that.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that engines are good, and it's kind of, I think, like Lyndon alluded to it a bit, where it's strictly because the definition of it is, they're cards that are better than the sum of their parts, right?
Yeah.
Like if it is an engine, it's because you've inherently in the definition, tagged it as just being a better, outcome. So
I guess
engines are good.
Like, I guess I'll disagree somewhat. I think, like, obviously, sort of the standalone engines, like these, just like absolutely, broken in half cards, Necropotence, Rhystic Study. Yeah, like obviously those cards are good. I'm not gonna say that they're not good. But really, I think sort of the more interesting focus of a discussion is like in CEDH, is the meta in a place where putting together like a package of cards where you're looking to assemble usually multiple of them at once, and don't sort of immediately win you the game. Like, is that something you can essentially afford to be doing? Right? Like, the win conditions are just so strong and so good. Like, Oracle Consult is so easy that, it's an interesting question of, like, do you really want to be tutoring for Priest of Titania to, so you can activate your Thrasios a bunch of extra times, over the course of the next 3 turns, when, like, almost every tutor that finds you Priest finds you Oracle, right? And then you just need to find Tainted Pact or Demonic Consultation, and you're golden. So
I think a good example, though, of a card that does kind of make the cut is Neoform, because it is like part of it can be included in an engine, but it does have that like very competitive base case, and it is like seen in multiple competitive decks.
Yeah, it almost seems that like what we're seeing now is like there are obviously engines in the command zone, those still see a lot of play, but in terms of engines in the 99, we're trending towards the engines that most easily pivot to being things other than engines are the ones that are still
I think the meta is faster, and I think like a lot of these, like the kind of central theme on a lot of these engines is just game actions, and there are just fewer game actions.
Yeah, I think one thing that kind of I was thinking about engines and the analogy to cars is that if a kind of base deck is just a steady speed, like if you play some kind of generic 2/2 and you're just attacking over and over again, you're drawing a card every turn, there's like a consistent speed, consistent velocity, whereas an engine that's like truly scalable, and that we didn't really get into this about engines that scale versus engines that are consistent. So like a Friction Arena is just you're increasing your speed a bit. You instead of going 10 miles per hour for our American friends, or whatever kilometers per hour, you're increasing it up to like 20, but you're not really going, you're not accelerating. So engines that scale, what I would say are like the analogy to acceleration. And there are some engines, I think Seedborn Muse is kind of a good one, where Seedborn Muse Thrasios, where you're activating Thrasios, and if you're getting more lands and more cards, you're able to play more big mana sources and kind of feed into it and just keep gassing up the fire. So the amount of cards you're drawing per turn is going to be increasing turn over turn. Those kinds of engines, I think, are typically pretty strong in CDH, but it's only strong if people should only be including these kinds of engines if you're trying to win a longer game. So you might include something like a Seedborn Muse in as a hedge if you're trying to be able to win that long game, or you're trying to take it long and trying to win that. Like that's where they're going to shine. Because at base, everything could just be, if there was no value engines at all, it really could just be, race to the consult, race to the Thoracle consult, race to the breach combo, race to the ad nauseum, which, many decks have shown, at least in the current meta, that's a viable strategy. But sometimes there's a stalemate that happens, right? Sometimes people have their interaction / protection, or sometimes there's a stacks effect, and there's a bit of like a Mexican standoff going on where no one's really going to go for it because they're going to get countered and the next person is going to win. So having a piece that you can play that's going to accrue you value over time, and ideally at an accelerating pace, is going to help you, take that extra leap in win percentage and allow you to win those games that you wouldn't otherwise be able to. Because I was going to say something about like how people do threat assessment and what to counter, but there's kind of like on the threat of, should I counter the spell of Thassa's Oracle Consult? You have to counter that or you're going to lose. You don't have to counter a Seedborn Muse because it doesn't immediately lose you the game, but like realistically you're going to lose the game if you just let a Seedborn Muse stick around. So that brief little knockdown in having to counter a spell, and if you could go down the chain down to like literally a Phyrexian Arena, right? Those kinds of things are what's really going to allow you to break those kinds of locks. So I think in summary, I think engines are good, but you need to be judicious in which engines you're selecting. Maybe having like a minimum effective engine package, and I guess doing it in the right deck and understanding when is the right time to deploy such an engine.
Yeah, so basically just be good,
Yeah, I think that's our entire podcast. We can kind of just sum up all of our episodes with just be good,
Every card is a magic card, and you just have to be good.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone have anything to say about what I was saying, or?
Yeah, I was gonna just say, like, I think that was a really great kind of overall kind of conclusion. Like, I think you addressed a lot of really good points with that.
Awesome. So I think that covers our engines good. I feel like that's what we discussed. Is the meta engine focused? Like less so now. I guess,
yeah, I do have sort of I think I've seen the meta's like it's almost divided. It's like a trimodal distribution where like there's games where it's just too fast for engines to really get online and make a difference. Then there's the sort of mid-rangey games which are absolutely engine focused, like the fast decks sort of peter out, and then it's like, oh look, this person has like a Thrasios that they're activating, and they're just like outdrawing the table, and eventually they're going to convert that into a win. Or, some other, like the person with the Rhystic Study drew a bunch of cards when everyone was trying to win early on, and then they were ahead. And then, so those ones are obviously engine focused. And then there's the games which are focused around the lack of engines, which is where, God. Like someone plays some stacks, and then the fast decks can't win, and none of them have engines, and you all just kind of sit there passing in turn order, and you're like, okay, there's like overlapping hate, it's really hard for me to go off. I also don't want to remove the hate because then somebody else might go off, and then
And can I just bring up the fact that is so easy to do with Opposition Agent and Hull Breacher, and it's so easy to do that now.
Yeah, and Draneth Magistrate as well. It's just like someone just slams a Draneth Magistrate, and then like they don't, for whatever reason they don't have a good way of drawing cards. And then everyone's like, well, I guess here we are.
And everyone's on like at least two of those three cards, right?
Yeah. There's like two Draneths in play.
It's like one player, the Thrasios Tymna player plays a Draneth, and then some other like Tymna player plays a Draneth or something, and it's like, or just someone else plays a Draneth. It's like, well, I can't break parity anymore because my Tymna and Thrasios are stuck in the command zone. Yeah.
There should be a special rule where you just remove them all at once.
Yeah, it's like the old legendary rule where like having two in the same name means they're both sacrificed no matter who controls them.
There's a special rule called Run Toxic Deluge that I think everyone has forgotten. Should remove every stacks piece all at once and let the game
Too bad
actually
it costs
continue.
a card and 3 mana, Yeah. Too bad.
So then next question we had is, when should you put engines in your deck? I think I kind of answered that with when you want to try and when you want to try and win the late game. Because if you look at the CDH metagame report, where it's broken down on the average turn that the game ends on, like there is a lot of the games that end really quickly where the engines, like if you have just a completely engine-based deck where you're just not going to win because your engine doesn't have enough time to accrue value compared to the other decks. But there's a significant portion of the games that do go long. And, if you stick an early engine and you're just, accruing value, that's, you're favored in those games. So you really, I think the best answer is your deck should probably have some kind of engine backup plan to fall back on, because you really should just be hedging your strategies a bit, right? Have some way to give yourself wins in the long game, and then don't be all in on the long game. Otherwise, you're just going to lose to the turbo decks. So have a balanced EDH deck diet.
And that can be as easy as putting a Neoform in your deck.
Yeah.
That easy.
I mean, I guess a lot of the Thrasios Tymna decks are kind of, if you're running Thrasios and Tymna, your backup plan is in the command zone, so you don't really need to devote 99.
You've kind of conquered the late game and the early game.
And finally, we have how to select an engine and what type. One of you guys handle this one?
Probably just the best engine in your colors. No, I don't know. I think that's again like a meta type discussion, right?
Yeah, I think the best type of engines to look for are ones that are obviously standalone, when those should already all be in your deck usually. Sylvan Library, Rhystic Study, Necropotence.
You also do want to have the best engine, in like the engine that goes the latest.
Yeah,
probably.
There's a weird metagame around that. Yeah.
Which is definitely easier said than done, because not all engines go late, or some engines do go late but have significant deck building requirements, like dropping black.
Yeah, I think the other thing that is important to you need to look at particularly your access to these engines. So if you're going and putting in you're putting in a whole bunch of pieces that synergize with Yisan, and you're like, okay, I'm going to play Yisan. First of all, you then need to look okay, well, now I have this curve for Yisan. How does this fit with things like, am I also going to play the Neoform, Eldritch Evolution, potentially Natural Order stuff? But also, is my deck a deck that's reasonably going to be accessing Yisan a lot? Because if I'm putting, let's say I'm putting Sylvan Safekeeper in the deck, and I want to, I can get it with Yisan and use it to protect stuff, or whatever the card is, or I'm putting in Quirion Ranger or Wirewood Symbiote to untap Yisan. If that card's not good in your deck, and you're not doing something to get Yisan into play consistently, then you're definitely setting yourself up for failure, because a bunch of the time you're gonna draw Wirewood Symbiote and be like, I don't have any elves, or like I have exactly like Priest of Titania that I don't want to bounce. So you need to figure out like how consistently are you actually going to be able to realize the full value of your engine, and then balance that against what are the costs of including that engine in your deck.
Yeah, I think the optimal engine is one that's accessible and not slot intensive. So a good example, I think, is Gitrog Monster. So in Gitrog, sometimes new players will ask, why don't you run Crucible of Worlds? I already see you running Ramunap Excavator. And the thing is that when you go from, let's say, no Crucible, no Ramunap Excavator, when you put in Ramunap Excavator, you're really getting like 10 copies of the card, right? Because you're getting Ramunap and you're getting Worldly Tutor, and like all of these tutors that can then find Ramunap as the value engine just makes it such an accessible card that you're going to be able to find it if you want it. And then it's just doesn't require extra slots, right? Like it just slots directly into the deck with all the fetch lands and value lands you're already running. So it doesn't require anything additional. So that's kind of like the optimal sort of thing you're looking at. So with Neoform, again, you don't necessarily need to change up your entire Neoform, your entire deck to conform to Neoform if you're already running a bunch of like the good cards that you already want to be running. So that's kind of like the optimal engine, at least in the meta as is, I think. Yeah.
Nice.
Anyone have anything else to say about engines before we move on?
Vroom vroom.
Right on.
I don't know much about cars, but I do know about engines.
Hell yeah. Okay, so time for everyone's favorite segment, Gut Check.
Gut check.
Gut check.
Thank you, Morgan. Okay.
You're welcome.
So this week's Gut Check is, what is your favorite deck of all time? So I'm letting you give one. You get to say one EDH deck, one CEDH deck, one deck in 60 card, and you're allowed one honorable mention.
What? Oh my god.
You don't have to take the honorable mention, but yeah. So, well, let's hear it.
CEDH deck, EDH deck, other format, and then honorable mention.
EDH, CEDH, 60 card, and an honorable mention if you want.
Oh man.
Okay. My favorite 60 card deck, I'll start with that one because I figured that one out the fastest, is Legacy Nick Fit. I really enjoy, like...
What is Nick Fit?
It's a like mid-rangey value deck built around Cabal Therapy and Veteran Explorer. It preys on the fact that no one's playing, or at the
Basics?
time, like no one's playing basics.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, you get like, you search out 4 basics and your opponent, like, you have 2 Veteran Explorers die. Search out 4 basics, your opponent searches out 2, and then they don't have any basics left. It's historically leveraged. It's been kind of like Pod in certain ways. Like, it had some toolboxy cards. It's played cards like Recurring Nightmare, which is just a sweet card. It feels a little bit like Coco decks sometimes, and it's just like at the intersection of a lot of other really cool archetypes, and punishes people for playing greedy mana bases, which is like, something I greatly enjoy.
So let's do
Nice.
Everyone's favorite 60 card first. So I'll do mine. My favorite 60 card deck, which is I think is kind of funny compared to my other favorites, and you'll see why, is Legacy Manaless Dredge. And I think it's just...
What?
It's so weird. At least, okay, it used to be kind of unique and weird. Not so much anymore with all the DFC,
The double face.
like...
Yeah.
with the Balustrade Spy and whatever the heck it's called.
Isn't that just kind of a different deck? Like, Oops All Spells is not the same thing.
It's not, but they're kind of doing similar, like, not playing. The reason I like Manaless Dredge is because it doesn't play like Magic, right? It's really just putting together a bunch of cards and just completely warping the game into something else. Like it's just so strange. Like the entirety of Magic is built upon paying mana for spells, right? And then you're missing your draw step. You're not doing your draw step anymore. You're putting everything in the graveyard. Things are coming into play for free. It's got like combo aspects, and obviously you can reanimate like a Whirlpool Drake or something, draw a bunch of cards and replace those with dredges and just mill your entire deck. The deck used to run Balustrade Spy to do that. But if you're doing Whirlpool Drake, then you can pitch that to Force of Will if you want free interaction. Like there's just it interacts with hands with Cabal Theory. It does everything, or does many things that normal Magic decks do, but without paying mana. It's just very strange and cool. I'm a big fan. Yeah. Matt, do you have
it is very unique
60 card? Oh yeah,
I have a toss up.
I was gonna say the reason why I thought it was similar to the Oops All Spells is because Oops All Spells is also kind of like breaking what Magic was supposed to be doing. But yeah, they do it in different ways. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah. I mean, so the deck that I enjoyed to play the most in 60 cards was probably Blue White Tron in Modern, because it had such, like, at least at the time that I was playing it, I had such a I kind of had the most understanding in regards to like the game plan versus different matchups, as well as how to sideboard, and that deck felt the most complete at the time to me because of that fact. It was very like, it was like a well-oiled machine in that regard, and it plays out, very like, how it plays out in the early game, in the mid game, and the late game. But I think, like, honestly though, the deck that really truly does that the best, that actually wins games, is Death and Taxes, and probably Legacy Death and Taxes for that matter. So I probably have to say that that's my favorite 60 card deck, even though it's not necessarily a single deck.
Okie dokie. On to, let's do our favorite EDH deck next. So I was thinking about this. I think my favorite EDH deck is my Safi Hidden Commander Emiria the Skyrim deck.
Yeah,
I love that deck. I pointed out, so I think my CDH deck and my honorable mention deck are going to be lands based decks. And I thought the reason why I said it's going to be a bit funny that my first 60 card deck was a deck that ran no lands. Yeah. But I just love lands and Emiria interacting with the graveyard. One of my favorite things to do. Lands and graveyard stuff, and just like toolboxy decks. It kind of incorporates all of that into one, and it's my favorite deck for that reason.
I find it very funny that you like have such a thing for lands when you came from Yu-Gi-Oh! And like lands is the type that the most doesn't have an analog in Yu-Gi-Oh!
But in many ways, maybe that's why I like it the most, because that was something content I was missing, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh my god, lands are great.
Oh wait, a resource system?
Yeah.
Oh whoa, what's this?
What?
Okay, Morgan, what's your favorite EDH deck?
Oh man,
yeah, it's a tough one.
That's a tough one. I think played so many EDH decks and played against so many EDH decks. Dude, everyone who's ever played Angry Omnath.
Just sing Marisol, man. You know you want to. No.
I genuinely don't think that's my
I don't think you think it's
deck of mine.
Either. It's because it's only because
honestly, I'd be more inclined to say Daxos than I would.
Really, I would love for you to say Daxos, man. That's
yeah. Honestly, I think Daxos was like it has a special place in my heart because it was just like so clearly me, just essentially like accepting that our meta had changed and like refusing to change with it. And I was just like, okay, you know what? If people are just gonna play more creatures and like win even more out of nowhere, I'll just play more Wraths so I can just Wrath every turn until the game ends, and then no one will like. Rather than like, okay, maybe I need a slightly different approach to solving this problem.
I'm
it was
still
just
triggered, man. In the decks those days, I can't build a deck that doesn't do well through Wraths. Like I actually can't finish the deck, or I have no motivation to build a deck that doesn't work through Wraths.
Yeah. It's a good rule of thumb for people to follow. Yeah.
A really interaction in general. Which brings me to my favorite deck, Wart, the Raid Mother.
Yes.
Which cannot be interacted with in any reasonable way besides you killing it.
Nice.
Or you put down a rule of law. But people don't do that in mid-power, so at least people other than Lyndon don't do it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's unfortunate because my rule of laws keep coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like the conditions on Lavinia Azorius Renegade are fair enough that it's like mid power. It's not like a problem in mid power, right? Right.
So you're saying I can't play my favorite deck?
Okay. Also, the thing with all of Matt's every time Matt comes up with like a mid power deck, dude, I just get so into it, and I'm like, oh my god, I've got to like look at all the cards for this deck and like brew my own version. Matt has excellent taste in mid power decks and like just concepts, man.
Well, I haven't told you about my latest concept because
Oh,
I'm
God.
still struggling with it. It's
All
not
right.
ready to be unleashed. But,
Okay, so next up we've got our favorite CDH decks. I mean, Gitrog Monster, obviously, for me. Lands and Graveyard, and also sentimental place for being my first like true CDH deck.
Wow. Imagine you just had to wait until Reed was out of the room to say that.
Yeah. He knows.
He knows.
I mean, I feel like Varel's Hook was more real when you first built it.
Yeah. But it wasn't like super meta. Like Gitrog Monster was like very Gitrog Monster has like never dropped in popularity, I swear to God.
It's because it was instantly hipster and has maintained its hipster status.
It's not hipster though. It's like the most popular deck server of all time.
And yet you're somehow all hipsters.
There's just a
bizarre.
few people. I can't imagine it being the most popular deck, the Discord, but like that's because I don't Discord.
It's
Like, that just blows my
by
mind.
a large margin.
Yeah.
Of like active users.
It's got
I mean, it's
2,200 members.
It's hard to count like active users, but at the very least users.
Like I mean, just what's the feel? Like what it feels like it's the most active.
Oh, it's by
No,
far
no,
the
no,
most
there's, like-
active. In terms of active
in terms
members,
of messages,
Yeah.
in terms of members, and in terms of messages per unit time, it's the most active CDH deck server by a pretty wide margin.
Okay.
because it's dude, I'll tell you, Urza and Najila are like the next closest, and they're close-ish in members, but I think they trail by like
Yeah.
500.
The Gila doesn't surprise me.
I think Food Chain is also actually maybe that one hasn't.
But in
grown
terms of
as much in the
activity,
past.
it's because the Gitrog server is like such a cult community that like in terms of activity, no other deck server comes close. I'll Matt, after the show, I'll pull up the numbers on like the amount of messages the Gitrog server sent in the past month compared to like the next runners up, and it'll blow your
and
mind.
then
Somehow
also
all
filter by
terrible. It's
filter by
very impressive.
memes.
Yeah,
and then,
then it'd be 0. So Morgan, favorite CDH deck?
Anyone want to try and guess?
Holland.
I wasn't gonna say Holland, and I
Muldrotha.
definitely am not saying Muldrotha.
Dang.
Definitely not. But it might be. Anola. That's my
No,
guess.
it's definitely Vanifar.
Matt, we were so close.
Now,
If Raid had been on, we would have gotten that. We covered all
not
three.
now, but when like Vanifar is a deck when Flash was legal. Obviously, the rest of the meta around it was not super fun. But just like I don't know, it was like it was like brain candy every time trying to like. It's like, okay, this puzzle has a solution. I know it does. And then you just have to like look at all these like weird misshapen pieces and then also realize that like one of your pieces is broken and 2 of them are missing and you're like, but I can still assemble this. And I don't know, it just like I just had so many like really satisfying like, you know, I saw a line that like never occurred to me, you know, when I put the deck together and was like working through the lines and goldfishing and whatever. It's like this never occurred to me, like, you know, I drew this piece and there was a null rod and there was a this, and like it just, you know, I had to get through like so many different things to like get the deck to actually work. And it was also very rewarding to like have people essentially go like, meh, this deck, like I think people, they saw it, they're like, this looks crazy. They put like 10 seconds of thought into it and went like, okay, this actually doesn't seem that good in just Simic. And then like to have the deck actually work and, you know, like perform in like online games and at our meetups and then also in tournament, was like a really satisfying experience.
See, I remember it as I wanted to see the card was spoiled, and then I think, I don't know, somehow I guess we were DMing, and then it was clear that you were working on a build, and you brought it to one of our meets, and I'm like, I'm just gonna let it resolve. I'm gonna watch it happen because I need to know how deadly it is. And you had like, I don't know, a 2 CMC in play or something like very low, and you obviously won on like turn 4. And I never let it resolve past that game.
But no, because the first night, like I took that deck to 9-0 when I first started playing it. And I remember like the first night I took it out, there was also a game where there was like, she got countered or killed twice and there was a curse totem in play. And I still somehow pulled it out.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And then
definitely,
yeah. It certainly, yeah, obviously, you know, that was like,
but that's, I think that's
people
more
adjusted,
like,
but it was,
yeah, that's more like people catching on to that fact a bit later than me. You can't let it resolve. Well, you can let it resolve. You just can't let it untap.
Yeah, definitely. I've gotten way too many people way too many times with the... I mean, now it's Tidal Barracuda, not Dozan, but at the time it was Dozan.
Oh my god.
It's just like, all right, I'll activate it. And they're like, well, I'll just wait until he, like, commits a combo piece, and then I'll just, like, bounce the Vanifier. I was like, cool, Dozan? All right.
Matt, favorite CDH deck?
I don't know, to be honest with you. Like, strictly hours, I probably have the most hours in Teferi, and that felt good, getting on that deck, like, early.
Yeah.
But I think my most satisfying wins, though they are very few, has probably been my Thrasios Bruce deck.
Nice.
Because you're like, the game is always on turn like 40 or something, right? Like it's always like a long game, and those are always fun games. At least with our play group. And you always have like no cards left. So, I don't know, it's fun. Or you've burned like 20 counter spells in a turn cycle. You know, they're satisfying.
Remember that brief blissful period where you were playing Teferi and like no one was playing Dimna?
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, that was a great time. It was quite an eye opener for sure. And now I play 3 toughness commanders.
Awesome. Okay, I have an honorable mention, and my honorable mention is my Golos 99 land stack.
God.
It's the culmination of my love-hate relationship with Golos. I've built, as I've mentioned in a previous episode, like 5 or 6 different Golos decks, and every time it's been like, this is too good. Gotta, nerf it somehow. Gotta make it so I can't activate Golos. It's still too good. It's like, just don't run any spells, man. And then also just, I think it's like the ultimate expression of everything you can do with lands in like Commander or like Magic. Just being able to, like, the idea being try and do everything in the same way that Manaless Dredge is try and do everything, all the same stuff as a normal deck in Magic without, spending mana. Try and do the same thing as any other normal deck in Magic without having any spells. And lands have gone to the point where you can pretty much do that. So, yeah, definitely an honorable mention for me.
I definitely respect your, like, Mutaful Griffin untap combo. I don't remember exactly how it works, but you came up with this line, I guess, where you could like turn Mutavault into a Griffin and then untap it with like a Griffin untapper land.
Okay, so I'll give the listeners.
No, we're not going into this. This episode is long enough as it is.
Honestly,
Okay.
every time you bring up the Golos
veto.
deck, though, you have to just be like, well, it's my Golos deck. https:// architect. Please leave a comment.
True.
Gotta
Okay.
really-
Anyone else
really
have
get
any
it out
honorable
there.
mentions?
Oh man, okay. I mean, this is kind of like, I guess it is, but I was working on like Goyo's Vengeance stuff in Modern way before. I can't even remember the deck name now, but
Grishelbrand?
Grishelbrand. No, not Grishelbrand. No.
What?
Yeah, Grishelbrand.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was
that was the
Grishelbrand.
Goyos deck, yeah.
Way before like Grishelbrand was a popular deck, though all the cards were obviously legal in Modern. Put it down, and then like a couple years later, Grishelbrand came on, and I'm like, I can't believe I didn't think of this.
Okay, Matt
Like,
has also
I
been
was
on the
looking
ball
at those
with
cards.
Storm too. Matt was working on gifts, like a gift Storm deck before gift Storm was like a thing, and he was so close, man. He was so close. I think what was
Can't get there.
the what's the card, the green card that adds 1 mana of each color?
Channel the Sun.
Channel the
Channel
Sun.
the
Yeah,
Suns,
dude,
yeah.
we were working on like Channel the Sun piles. It was hot.
Yeah, I was able to beat Morgan's Soul Sisters deck with Storm. I mean, not consistently.
I mean, I guess you were just too early, right? Because you were pre-Baral,
Yeah.
Well,
which is like what
Electromancer
really
was
made
still a thing,
Storm.
right?
Sorry.
Electromancer was still a thing.
Yeah, sure, but
think
playing
I was
8
running it
Electromancers,
somewhere.
4
Yeah,
of which
that's
are easier
true.
to cast than Electromancer,
That's
is
true.
pretty hot.
Yeah.
I guess I have a very vague and general honorable mention, which is just the casual magic decks that I played with my friends in my spare period in high school that got me into the game. There were like too many to like, go through all of them. There was one that was like, one of my friends had a deck that was based around the suspend cards that put themselves back into suspend, and then like Paradox Haze for extra upkeep, so you were like cycling through them faster.
Nice.
That was a sweet
That's
deck.
cool. Yeah.
Um,
Honestly, yeah, this is good. Okay, this is kind of a weird shout out, but shout out to all of Magic Aid's YouTube channel. All of his decks are awesome. He makes sweet decks.
Cool. So before we wrap up the show, we've got a few listener questions that we're going to cover. So the first listener question comes to us from Pillsbury Smowboy. And the question is, which CDH staple has the best art?
Okay, I have a bunch of fake answers I want to get out of the way.
Okay.
So my first two fake answers are Dark Ritual and Counterspell because they have the most art variety options.
Okay.
And
yeah.
I think they're very consistent in being good. Yeah, I
the
guess
most art variety options. That's cute.
Oh, yeah, basic lands. Yeah, Morgan.
I've
No,
Island
like-
and Forest.
Sure. You can sleeve up your full art Zendikar lands. I don't care, dude. I'm talking about real art. I think one of the best arts is probably Pact of Negation, like all time. Though Jessica's Will, I think, is also pretty cool, but is new. So we'll see how that sits.
I don't want to give this answer because I don't want people to think I think it's a staple, but I'm slowly accepting that I've just lost this one, so I'm gonna say Peer into the Abyss.
Yeah, Pierre has really cool art. It reminds me of Recurring Insight. And it's
If
just,
only it was CEDH playable.
it's super
Yeah,
dope.
only. Yeah.
My answer is Ad Nauseam. I think it's just, dude, you look at the guy with his like no arms or whatever. He's like on the ground. He's like, ah.
It's pretty
cool,
cool. Yeah, it's
yeah.
pretty gnarly. Yeah. It's one of the few cards that I.
But to be fair, I was just
foil.
kind of like, I didn't go through every CDH staple and pick up my absolute favorite art. Which I mean, maybe my answer is probably different if I do that. But
Yeah, I picked up one of my decks and like looked through it.
Ad Nauseam has some pretty iconic art. Okay, and then our final listener question comes to us from Play M, which is, why is Sans Black Evo tier 1? I think the
Yeah, so,
answer
I
is
mean-
it's not, right?
You
This
may
is
be
a
expecting me to
CEDH
give a glib
podcast.
answer like it's not, but the thing is, it is. It's tier 1. And as we all know, tier lists start at S, and then they go A, B, C, all the way through Z, and then you get to 1.
True.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to say about that.
I mean,
Tier
does anyone?
double S.
I don't think anyone on the pod thinks like Songs Black Evo is like. It depends on how you tier lists, and I don't think we're gonna get into that. But like,
No, I think it's very poorly positioned in the metagame right now.
yeah,
Unfortunately, as much as it's a fun deck to play.
yeah, definitely still viable. It's like, yeah, lots of decks that are viable. Not everything can be the super well positioned uber top of the format. But yeah, thank you for our listener questions. So that about wraps it up for this episode. If you guys would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, via our email intonorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. An extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work towards improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we are at patreon.com/Into the North Podcast. Another way you can support us is via our TCG Player affiliate link. So anytime you want to purchase something from TCG Player, if you use our affiliate link, which is in the podcast/YouTube description, a portion of your purchase goes towards supporting the podcast. Thank you as always to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, to Nate Slover for our equally lovely podcast logo, to our video editor Manta Ray Hat, and to our long-suffering podcast editor Roadkill. Next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Until then, see ya.
Have a good one.